Hello, everybody. This is Teen Title Talk with Erin.
And Allie.
This is the podcast
where two librarians discuss two YA books every 2 weeks.
Today we don't have Courtney with us because she's on maternity leave still. So I have Allie. Allie works at the Derry Public Library as well as the Bookery in Manchester while she's pursuing her bachelor's degree. And she likes YA books, so I thought she'd be good to bring onto the show. Thank you, Allie, for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today we'll be talking about the books Adventure Zone, Here There Be Gerblins by Clint McElroy, Griffin McElroy, Justin McElroy, Travis McElroy, and Carrie Peach. And I don't know if that's the proper way to say her name, but she did the illustrations. And what did you read, Allie?
I read Mary's Monster by Lita Judge.
All right, before we do that, before we talk about our books, we're going to go ahead and reach into the jar of teen angst, and I'm going to ask Allie a couple of questions, and I'm going to answer some questions, too, about our teen selves, and then we will do some book talking. So, first question up is, this is an easy one, I think, to get started. What were you listening to as a teen? Favorite music, band, soundtrack, any and all of those things?
It's funny you bring up soundtracks because I was super into soundtracks. I've always been a huge nerd. And in particular, I was always really into Narnia and Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
So I had all of those soundtracks on CD, and I would listen to them all the time. I even had the special edition of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe soundtrack.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And then for my favorite band that I was obsessed with all through high school was Relient K, as any true, homeschooled Christian teenager
Gotcha.
would say.
I don't know. That's like a gap in my learning. So what kind of music is it? It's like
They, I would say like a Christian Blink-182.
Interesting.
Yeah. So kind of like punky stuff that the lead singer prided himself on doing a lot of puns in his lyrics.
Interesting.
Yeah, they were fun.
Interesting. I listen to soundtracks as well. I know I'm older than you. How old are you?
I'm 24.
All right, right. So I'm stretching back because I was like, oh, Lord of the Rings, wait a minute. I listened to Rent because I was a big theater nerd, so I listened to a lot of Rent. And I liked other musicals too. I remember we would put Phantom of the Opera on super loud and turn the lights out and just lay in our beanbag chairs and listen to them. But I also like movie soundtracks, like Gettysburg. I don't know why. God. I just really loved the drama of that one. And then when I was not being such a dork, I would listen to, I think, Dire Straits and Cake and old music. So I grew up in Vermont, and one of the things about Vermont is no matter when you grow up, it's like being in the 60s. So, and the 70s. So, CCR was always playing. So that's what I had on my plate. All right, let's talk about best friends. Who was your bestie? Where did you meet them? And what did you guys do together?
So I haven't always been in New Hampshire either. I moved to New Hampshire just before I turned 5. So most of my life still. But when I first moved here, I was really into sports. And my parents took me to join the local soccer team. And that's where I met my best friend. Her mom was the coach, and she was also on my team.
Awesome.
And, it was one of those, literally first practice, we bonded, and we played soccer together for years. And she lives in Hawaii now, actually, but we still keep in touch.
That's good. You should go visit her.
Yeah, right? Especially right now. I think this is a good time of year.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, we did lots of, I was very much of a, I don't like to use the word tomboy that much, but I was very much of a tomboy.
Gotcha.
Lots of sports. We played soccer all the time, and we played capture the flag all the time. I
remember playing capture the flag. That was around when I was growing up as well, probably since the beginning of time. So you guys usually revolved around your sports stuff.
Yeah, and just being outside all the time.
That's great.
Yeah.
As for me, I met my friends in kindergarten too, so around 5, right?
Yeah.
And I still get together with them. So Kim and Sam, I met when I was 5. We were in kindergarten together, and then Tristan, we kind of met in middle school, and so that unit I still see on a regular basis. Every 6 months, we do Girls' Weekend, which is really nice.
Yeah.
But we grew up together. We would when we were teens, we just hang out and do teen things like talk. Drive around at night, make cake at midnight on the kitchen floor, that kind of thing.
Yep.
That you just have fond memories of. We didn't do as much sports. Sam did sports. Tristan and Kim and I did more theater stuff, so we were always around the stage and doing tech rehearsals and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
So
that's cool.
And I did the lighting stuff, and Kim was always like the star. Tristan was in there somewhere doing some sort of piece on the stage. So it was a lot of fun. And all right, let's see the next one. Okay, did you have any bad qualities or habits? If you had to judge, what was your worst? And this, I know, is like shooting myself in the foot again, because I asked Audie last time to share a awkward moment, and it was so less awkward than mine. So what was your most bad habit, Allie?
Honestly, the only thing that comes to mind is, like we were talking about earlier, I was obsessed with music, and I was definitely the kind of annoying teenager that always walked around with my headphones in, and just kind of something that annoys me nowadays when people do, and I hate myself that I used to do the same thing.
Yes.
I grumble about teenagers all the time, but I was the exact same kind of annoying teen.
Yes.
With headphones in, just not paying attention to anybody, like sneaking, like I have, big curly hair, and
Right.
at the dinner table my parents had like a rule, no
headphones.
Yeah, and no cell phones and that kind of
Right.
thing, but I would like hide my headphones under my hair and just kind of.
How did they not? They must have caught
I mean,
on.
yeah, they would catch me all the time. But I was like,
Oh,
guys,
yeah.
I have to listen to Relient K. Their new album.
That's so great. But yeah, I think that's like the norm now. I don't know.
Yeah,
Whenever I go to visit Pinkerton, which is the local high school here, if I am doing like a visit of whatever to talk about books or writing, always the kids have it goes up through their sweatshirt and into their ears.
I have a lot of friends like my age now that do even like at the bookery, like before we open or whatever, the part-timers I'm there with will just have like their big headphones on,
They've got
like their Beats or whatever. And it drives me nuts, and I just can't believe that I used to do the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, music is awesome, but
Yeah,
it's
of
just
course.
like annoying to like not be available if people like need to.
Right. It's a little different in like a public setting. I
Yeah,
guess.
and especially like I was like the kind of kid that would be like, it's not too loud, like
And it
like
is.
yeah. My parents are like, we can hear it.
I never had that, but I do now. I have like those big headphones that I like go to the coffee shop and I have noise canceling headphones. and
Yeah,
I listen to
exactly.
it. But I don't want to hear anybody else. No one else should be talking to me at the
That's
coffee
fair.
shop if I'm writing.
Yeah,
I'm there, but I don't want to actually interact.
yeah.
So yeah, mine obviously were way worse than that. So I was like, oh, lying, cheating, stealing.
What? You?
I know. I just have changed my ways, Allie. I was really good in a lot of ways, but I had compulsions. That's what I would think. That's the way I've kind of narrowed in on it a little bit.
Have you heard of intrusive thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah.
So like that kind of
From
thing.
you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I did talk to you about it.
And
That's
I
so
went and looked it
funny.
up, and I was like, oh, maybe I'm obsessive compulsive because I do have compulsions and intrusive thoughts.
I was just talking about it yesterday because when we were at the
someone else?
museum, one of the adults was saying how like they just feel like a compulsion to like, what if I like just touch the statue or like
Have to
shove
grab
it or
onto
like
this.
yeah.
But they didn't, did they?
No, they did not. No, don't destroy works of art.
I think that I'm going to go with cheating because that's more of a bad habit or bad quality than lying and stealing is straight. That's just a crime.
Yeah.
So I would
Less of a bad habit, more of a like.
Yeah. And I'm disappointed because even on like the things that I was better at. So in math, I always sat behind Stevie, and I always just took his answers. He was much better at math. He was my friend. He'd like lean over to the right so I could see his answers. And we're great friends still, but I don't see him anymore. But
See, I guess that's the benefit, or not really benefit, of public school, because there was no one for me to cheat off of.
You were just by yourself.
I was
like,
the oldest. I had to like do everything first. I'm sure my younger
Exactly.
siblings cheated off of
Maybe
my work books, but
And I remember in history, that I actually was decent at, or could have been much, that's more along my lines of some interests. But my sister was, her literal PhD is in history, right? So she was always great at that. So I've dubbed it like not my thing. And they didn't change the curriculum from year to year. So she had this binder full of class responses to these texts, and I would copy them word for word.
Oh my God.
And then go to the hockey game. It was like, I'll just do this really fast. Yeah, so I'm not proud of it. It was a bad quality, and
Yep.
that was probably my worst. No, it wasn't my worst. It was my second worst, I'd say. So yeah, I don't do that anymore. All of my work is my own.
That's good. That's
And I'm gonna
important
take
as a
ownership
writer. Yeah. There are things in place to prevent that.
Exactly. So, all right, let's move on to books. What you read, Mary's Monster. Tell me a little bit about Mary's Monster by Lita Judge.
Yeah, it's a graphic novel about Mary Shelley, who wrote the classic horror novel Frankenstein, which is actually kind of seen as one of the first science fiction novels. So this graphic novel kind of details Mary Shelley's life all from her childhood to meeting her husband, Percy Shelley, to her writing Frankenstein and what happened after that in her life. She actually had a pretty sad
I know.
life.
I read that. I haven't read a lot about Mary Shelley before that, but all right. So let's see. And I read Adventure Zone, which is completely opposite that. We both read graphic novels, and
Yep.
Adventure Zone is based on a podcast by the McElroy brothers and their dad. And it's fun. It's about this D&D campaign. Here, there, big gerblins. And it's a lot of fun to listen to. It was fun to read as well. So I'll talk a little bit more about that translation into podcast, into graphic novel as we go.
Cool.
But first, let me ask you a question. So I read Mary's Monster. I know Lita Judge. I love her. You should go visit her studio if you get a chance.
Oh,
It's in
okay.
Peterborough.
Oh, I had no
it's
idea.
magical. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I read it a while ago, and I noticed the book has this sort of magical and morbid blend of illustrations. Do you think that this made the book more accessible or interesting for you? To have it in graphic novel form
yeah.
as opposed to just being like dense text?
It definitely helped because of working two jobs and being in
Right.
school, I don't always have a ton of time to read as much as I would like. And I think Mary Shelley is super interesting,
Right.
and I definitely wanted to learn more about her, but the fact that it was a graphic novel made it easier for me to like make the time to get through something that actually had a lot of detail about her life without taking a ton of my not free time
Right.
away.
Right.
But yeah, the illustrations were definitely really captivating and added to the story of her life.
I thought so too. So you said you knew about Mary Shelley before.
Yeah, somewhat.
And you want to kind of learn a little bit more. Did you learn anything more about her from this book, or did you already know everything there was to know, and this was just interesting?
Well, so right before what actually made me pick up this graphic novel was I watched the movie that came out last year called Mary Shelley that has Elle Fanning in it.
Okay,
and
I
she
didn't
plays
see it, but
she plays Mary Shelley, and it does take some more I guess artistic license a little bit more with her life. And after I watched that, I kind of wanted to read more and figure out more of like the facts of what her life was like. So that's why I picked up the graphic novel. And those two together kind of sparked me going on kind of a Mary Shelley kick. And I actually went through yeah, exactly. And I actually went through the bibliography at the back of the graphic novel.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And I checked out from the library some of the books that Lita Judge had used to cite, resources for writing this book and find out more about Mary. Like something like I didn't know until I read this was that her mom was Mary Wollstonecraft.
right.
Do you know who that is? She wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women.
Oh, yeah.
So she was one of the first big feminists, and I had no idea that she was Mary Shelley's
I didn't
mom.
realize that either.
Yeah,
I mean, her name sounds familiar, but I don't know if that she's mentioned at the beginning of Mary's Monster or not.
I think she's touched upon, yeah.
Yeah, that's probably why it sounds familiar.
Yeah, and her dad also was really famous. William Godin, and he helped with the French Revolution, inspire some of the philosophers and political activists in France at the time. So she kind of came from a really interesting background, yeah, and then was also obviously super interesting. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I learned a lot. It was really cool.
And that's great, yeah. So Lita does have that long list of resources at the back. So tell me about some illustrations, because I really liked the text in Mary's Monster, but I felt like what really drew me in was the cover image and the the style of the illustrations. Did you have a favorite?
Yeah,
And can you
I think-
describe it for our listeners? Obviously, it's kind of hard because we're not showing, we're hearing, but
It's funny you asked that question because there was actually like one illustration that I opened to the page and like immediately had to just kind of stop and stare at it because I thought it was so poignant.
okay.
So it's this image of Mary lying down, facing the viewer, the reader, with kind of a hazy image of like her monster Frankenstein in the background. And this image takes place after. So Mary, her mom died in childbirth or right afterwards. So she actually never really got to know her mother except by reading her mom's books.
Got it.
And Mary, I think almost every child she had died either right after they were born or soon after, like in young childhood.
And how many did she?
It was like 5 miscarriages
so, too,
or
yeah.
children dying and young. So this one page has that image of her and then the caption says, I am 17 and already I am a daughter to a ghost and mother to bones. And I just think that's so heavy and it's so tragic that, I don't know, she was so young and just completely felt like alone and abandoned in her life.
Right.
Because even she had a really interesting relationship with Percy Shelley, her husband, because so they kind of prescribed to that idea of relationships where like they didn't really believe in marriage.
Right.
But he kind of left her alone and abandoned more often than he should have to kind of pursue other things that were making him happy.
Right.
And so while she like didn't feel like he had to feel like committed to her and standing by her all the time,
Right.
He definitely left her alone more than he
it
should
seemed
have.
like the support wasn't there.
Yeah,
the way it could
exactly.
have been.
Yeah. So a lot of her life was kind of spent just kind of dealing with these tragedies that were happening in her own life by herself.
Right.
And Percy also had a lot of his own stuff going on.
He did seem to. They both seemed tormented.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to see that Frankenstein was born out of that
Yeah.
sort of. It's interesting to hear about Mary Shelley because of all this tragedy in her life. And then, you got to make that connection like, okay, and then she was writing this to.
Yeah, so
For
that's
what
kind
purpose?
of, I read Frankenstein in high school
Yeah.
and I got something completely different out of it than I am now, after knowing a little bit more about Mary and reading these books about her, where I almost feel like she wrote about the monster as like kind of another way she saw herself like alone and rejected in the world
Right.
and not being allowed to like partake in society how she should have been, and just kind of being locked out of, like, she felt like she was being locked out of a world of men.
Right.
Because even when she tried to publish Frankenstein,
Right.
people gave Percy all the credit, and they wouldn't, like, originally it wasn't published under her name.
Right.
And she didn't even they didn't believe like a woman could write something
I
so
hate
like strong and powerful. So
All the
even
rage,
her book
all
that,
the bottled rage that she must have created.
so even the book that she's writing about how she's not being allowed into this world of the patriarchy.
Right.
It's the repercussions happen even just from that book. Like you just see it played out in real life as well.
So awful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, was there anything you would do differently or wanted more of in the book? Or did you feel like it was just a really well wrought?
I honestly think it was basically perfect.
Okay. I felt the same way, but I didn't want to push it on you. I was just like, I think this is so
No,
interesting.
yeah, I think the illustrations were like the perfect style to go along with like what her life was and what her writing was. And Lita Judge does a really good job pairing things that are happening in the background with the words that she's saying. Like they might not directly coincide, but it like maybe drops hints of something that's going to happen in the
Right.
future, or like how Mary is feeling. Yeah, it was, I don't know, it was very well executed.
Very nice. And if people like that book, what other books would you recommend? Any ideas?
I mean, I would check out the bibliography in the back of the
Alrighty.
book.
Sounds like that has
There's
a lot
like
of
a
good
really
stuff in it.
good, cool book called Romantic Outlaws
Okay.
that she recommends in the back. So Mary Shelley and Percy Shelley were friends with, what was his name? Lord Byron.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of people know the story of like there being a competition to write a spooky
Right.
story when they're all together, and that's when she wrote Frankenstein.
Right, yeah.
Lord Byron had a really interesting life as well. He was actually the father of Ada Lovelace, who was one of the
I recognize that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. She was a big female mathematician.
Right.
So there was another book called The Poet and the Vampire that she recommends in the back, talking more about the stories that came out of that night. There was one of their friends who was there wrote The Vampire, which was the first, one of the first like vampire books.
Yeah.
And I think that one, like that one and Dracula are kind of given the credit for creating the big vampire rush in storytelling.
Sounds like an interesting group of people.
Yeah.
And although I think it sounds like a fascinating group to be around, I also don't want to romanticize it too much.
Yeah.
Because it also seems like everybody there was also like
they're
intense
very
and tortured, and
Yes,
also didn't
exactly.
have a
Like we were
fun
saying,
time all the time.
yeah, they were kind of toxic for each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. They were kind of toxic, but it created a lot of emotional
arc.
creativity in them. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
All right. Well, awesome. So that's Mary's Monster by Lita Judge. Check out the book and also check out the resources at the back. So I read something completely different, just a funny, ridiculous thing called Adventure Zone. And do you have questions for me, Allie, about Adventure Zone?
Yeah, actually. So I honestly listen to the podcast all the time, and I'm a
Okay.
huge fan of the Adventure Zone series, but I haven't read the graphic novel yet. You said you did listen to some of the podcasts,
A little bit,
right?
yeah.
Do you think they did a good job translating the story into comic form? Because I know with the podcast, they
Right.
kind of go on tangents a lot, and like there's a lot of humor that I imagine is kind of hard to like.
Translate.
Yeah.
So I think it's better in podcast form.
Okay.
But I enjoyed it in graphic novel form
Yeah.
too. It's really hard to translate all that fun banter
Yeah,
that you hear in the
exactly.
podcast into a graphic novel because you can't go on and on. It'd be
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah.
And as I was listening to their podcast, I was like, oh, okay. Like, we're just not getting that one because I actually read first. I found the graphic novel. I read that first. Then I went and listened to the podcast just to
Okay.
see what it was about.
Yeah.
So, as I was listening, I was like, oh, we really do miss a lot of the fun banter. And the graphic novel, it's fun. It's, it's got some great illustrations. You do have to know, I think you have to know D&D in order to get it. I think if someone sat down and started reading it
Yeah.
and didn't understand, like, okay, that guy popping in is the dungeon master,
Yeah.
they'd be like, what is that? And also, the story's not really super cohesive. Like, it doesn't follow, like, here's the hero's
traditional,
journey,
like, yeah.
an arc, because it's a campaign.
Yeah.
And so they're going in a couple different directions and finding different information here and there and having these interesting dialogues that are just for fun, that might not necessarily fit like a natural storytelling narrative. And so if someone just jumped in and said, okay, I'm going to read Adventure Zone, I don't know anything about D&D, and they went in blind, they'd kind of be like, I don't know. What is this?
What about, like, I mean, because you read it without listening to the podcast
Right.
first. Is that a fine way to go into it, or do you have to listen to the podcast first?
I think you can go in without listening to the podcast. I think
you just need some sort of familiarity with like,
how D&D
the format,
works.
at least.
Because then you'll
yeah.
be giggling about, the time when the Dungeon Master pops in and says something, or it will just make more sense. If you didn't know it was a campaign, you would be like, well, what is this weird story? It's so quirky and bizarre and, but it was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Cool. I think board games in general have made a huge comeback recently, and specifically D&D has risen in popularity because of the Netflix show Stranger Things. Had you played D&D before reading this, or did it spark any interest in playing D&D?
So it's weird because I hadn't played until recently.
Okay.
And it was always one of those things that's like, oh my God, no, I'm not playing D&D. That's super geeky. I'm not quite that level of geeky. But I am, it turns out. It turns out I am. So we started playing probably just in the last 6 months. And it's fun. It's just fun and bizarre. And you just get a lot of food. And you go through this little adventure. And, our group isn't super serious about the role playing.
I think
So
that's
we'll
probably the
often-
way to do it, at least the first
and I think
time.
we're also a little awkward about that. Like we're not the group that naturally does that.
Yeah. You mean you don't do a fake voice for your character all the time?
My voice changes on a regular basis. Sometimes I'll try one, but I'm like, no. Usually I'm narrating. I'm like, okay, and then I do this, and I slash the. Well, I'm a sorceress, so I don't do a lot of slashing. I do
Okay.
but so yeah.
So the baby brother Griffin is the dungeon master in that campaign.
Baby brother, yes.
Yeah.
I think
The sweet
in the
baby
podcast
brother,
he
yeah.
said sweet baby brother, yeah.
And so, the brothers had to have a lot of discussions about how to best adapt his role for the graphic novel.
Right.
And it seems like from what you said that they kept him as a narrator and kind of retained that classic D&D storytelling format. Does that feel super forced, or would it have been more enjoyable if they had refrained from breaking the fourth wall, or did that kind of feel natural?
I loved that. Knowing D&D, I loved that.
Okay.
But when he popped in and was like, actually, you can't do that because blah, 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 it makes you laugh because you're kind of in on a secret.
Yeah.
If you don't know D&D, you're going to be like, what is that weird dude from Modern Times popping up in the corner there? There was a couple times where it kind of was a little lost until I really looked at the pages. Sometimes with graphic novels, I'm reading too fast and I need to pay more attention to the pictures. But I think he was blowing bubbles in his soda at one point because there was a swamp or something coming up. And I was like, why is it going blurp, blurp, slurp, blurp? And it was that kind of, what is this? And then once he's there and you see him with the soda, you realize, oh, he's making a sound effect.
Okay.
So it makes you giggle. But if you didn't know D&D, you'd be lost.
Okay. Well,
but I thought it worked very well because I think mostly fans are going to read it.
Yeah.
I think that's a treat for them. It just makes you laugh.
Yeah, it did actually blow up really big. The graphic novel. Again, working at the Bookery.
Right.
I listened to the podcast, so I ordered a couple off the bat. But then I had a hard time restocking it for a little bit because it was it was a lot more popular than they initially expected.
Oh yeah. I think anybody who's in on it just really would eat it up. So I think it was well adapted in that way. It was just
Perfect.
It worked.
Did you have a favorite character or brother, rather, I suppose?
It was hard for me to differentiate the different brothers because they are their characters, but I like Taco.
Okay,
and he's always searching for food
Taco's
and
great,
recipes. I just really
at least on the podcast, he's kind of trying to find the ingredients, to make
for tacos,
to make up tacos.
Even though his name is
Spelled differently,
instead of TACO.
Yeah, that's kind of his whole arc over all the arcs, I guess. Yeah,
right. There was a secondary plot line, and it was just fun. Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit, but what's your character like in your D&D campaign? You said she's a sorceress?
Yes. My character is Lady Dread. She's a mountain dwarf sorceress. And
she sounds badass.
She is. She's great. I love her. She's got a lot of different spells and cantrips. So cantrips are the kind of baby spell. And you can use them at will. So she has poison spray and shocking grasp, which is a zap, right? When you touch somebody.
Yeah.
And then there's spells that are bigger that are earth shake. So you I have her run in and jump on a table and whoosh, and it sends people flying back.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's really fun.
So this is obviously a very original story they're telling in the graphic novel and podcast, but do you have any recommendations for listeners who might be looking for something else that would be fun and adventurous like this graphic novel?
Yeah, I was thinking of quirky adventure and fantasy stuff. Lumberjanes came to mind first, even though it's totally different, but it had a similar then this thing pops out and then that thing pops
honestly,
out.
that's a great recommendation. That's kind of a similar vibe.
It totally is.
Yeah.
And I love Lumberjanes, and I don't know how many there are now, but there are plenty to dig into.
I think at least 6 or 7, if not more. And they also have, I think, a little book series too, not just the graphic novels.
Do they? Okay.
Yeah. I think it's middle grade though, a little younger, but
you're right, that's true.
The graphic novels are definitely enjoyable
totally.
For all ages.
I definitely like those. I Kill Giants came to mind. Zelda, that's a throwback. but
those are still great,
Yeah, those are great. And then there was one Delilah and Dirk, which I thought was good fantasy. That it might be a little bit more middle grade, but it would still probably hit the mark.
Okay, cool.
So
what's up next?
All right, next up, I'm going to have Audie Rule back in the studio with me, and I will be talking, we're going to do YA fantasy, so I'll be talking about The Brilliant Death by Amy Rose Capetta, and she will be talking about Grim Lovelies by Megan Shepherd. And listeners, if you get a chance to answer our 3 questions, those are, what was your favorite band, music, or soundtrack? Teens today, please tell us what you're listening to now. Who was your bestie? Who is your bestie if you're a teen today listening now? And what do you love about them? And then if you have any bad habits, I'm sure you don't. I'm the only one that has terrible habits. Please tell us what they are. If you write to us at teentitletalk@gmail.com, we'll read a few of our listener responses next time. Allie, want to take us out?
Sure. Thanks for joining us at Teen Title Talk. This podcast was brought to you by the Derry Public Library and DCAM Derry Community Access Television. Our theme was created and performed by Bandit Starling. Until next time.
Bye.